Our first speaker will be speaking on animal equality is Toni Shephard. She is the UK Director of Animal Equality and has been an animal protections campaigner for more than 25 years. Over the past 20 years, she has filmed inside dozens of factory farms and never ceases to be shocked by the cruel practices farmed animals are forced to endure. The knowledge that most people are inherently opposed to animal suffering and simply do not want to know how badly farmed animals are treated, coupled with the growing number of animal-free food options, give her hope for a factory farming-free future. She also holds a PhD in animal behavior.
Hello, thank you all for coming to listen to us talk about animals this afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here to the conference to speak about animal activism. This picture is not a recent one, as you might have guessed. That's from 1910, but it's 3,000 anti-vivisection protesters in Trafalgar Square. So Britain has a long and I'd say very proud history of standing up for the smallest, weakest and most vulnerable members of our society. In Queen Victoria's era, actually, the anti-vivisection movement was very strong, and Queen Victoria herself was against vivisection. I've been doing animal rights activism for over 25 years now, and for 21 of those years I've been living in the UK, and I've worked for a lot of the big animal rights groups. I started out working for PETA, I've worked at Viva, Animal Aid, the League Against Cruel Sports, and then since January I've been with Animal Equality. So I'm going to give you a short potted history basically of the last 20 years of animal activism in the UK, because I think it's quite important to learn lessons from what we've done in the past so that we can not repeat the same mistakes in the future and hopefully be more effective in what we do. And then I'll do an overview of what's going on now and how we can improve that for the future to be more effective. So when I first moved here, I worked for PETA, and I spent far too much of my time doing things like this all around the UK and Europe. Although PETA works on a broad range of animal issues, a large proportion of what they do is anti-fur campaigning. And certainly the largest proportion of my time was spent protesting against fur. They also did a lot of animal testing campaigns work, primarily against people who used animal testing for household products or cosmetics and toiletries, a little bit for medical experiments. But really, these were the two campaigns that took up the most of my time. A little bit on vegetarianism, but very much just sort of hit and run, high profile things that would grab a media headline without any real substance to them. PETA did do substantive campaigns on other issues. I mean, I know most of their tactics are very superficial, but there were all levels of fur campaigning. So you went after the manufacturers, the retailers, the designers, the government to try and get fur farms banned in the UK. So they did have a broad spectrum. The same with animal testing. They had a strategic plan of how they would try and get these companies to stop testing on animals. Whereas for farmed animals, it really was a good opportunity to tell people to go vegetarian, like if there was a big meat fair, dumping a ton of manure at the front entrance and sticking a sign in the middle of it that says meat stinks, but nothing really meaty, if you like, for want of a better expression. But they weren't unique in the animal movement in the UK at that time. So when I moved here in 1995, probably the biggest campaign going was the campaign against live exports. So animals being transported from the UK to the continent, mainly sheep and calves. And I mean, this made international headlines. I heard about it in Canada. We were all so impressed with this amazing British animal rights movement that we're getting 10,000 people out to these protests at the docks. And when Jill Phipps was killed trying to stop one of the lorries full of calves, that made news worldwide. And then, in addition to the grassroots protesters, there were groups like Compassion World Farming and the RSPCA who were pushing at the government level to try and get live exports banned. At the same time, a lot of anti-hunt stuff going on in the UK, again with the mass grassroots protests at any hunt meet, particularly on Boxing Day, the League Against Cruel Sports, the RSPCA and IFAW pushing for a hunting ban, doing the political work. And then, of course, hunt saboteurs out on the weekends trying to directly stop hunts from killing foxes. And then the other really big campaign in the 90s was anti-vivisection. So again, at different levels, you had groups like the BUAV and NAVs doing the political work, certainly trying to get cosmetic testing banned, and then working at trying to get animals replaced for medical experiments. And at the same time, mass protests from grassroots activists. This is against the last place that bred cats for vivisection in the UK. This was the last place that imported and quarantined monkeys to be used in vivisection in the UK. And we would get anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people out on these protests. So there was a huge movement in the mid to late 90s. And there were a lot of victories at that time. They seemed to come thick and fast around the end of the 90s, early 2000s. So this was consort beagle breeders, the last place that bred beagles for vivisection in the UK. They closed down because of protests, and all of these beagles were rehomed. The cat farm closed down, the monkey farm closed down, a big rabbit breeder closed down, all at the same time in the span of a few years. Cosmetic tests were banned in the UK in 1997, and then the sale of products tested on animals was banned in 2013. Sow stalls were banned in the UK in 1999, before they were banned in the rest of Europe. Fur farms were banned here in 2000. So we were on a roll. Live exports, I mean, most of the carriers, so all of the big ferry companies stopped taking live animals because of the massive protests that were taking place. The farmers had to actually start up their own company called Farmers Ferries to be able to export their animals, which meant it was much more expensive for them. And in 2010, it had actually gone down to just 4,000 sheep being exported from the UK. And then, of course, hunting was banned eventually in Scotland and then eventually in England. So we had this mass movement of people in the UK campaigning on a variety of animal rights issues and seemingly having a lot of victories. But things aren't always quite as they seem. So there were huge numbers of arrests at this time, particularly involved with the Huntingdon Life Sciences campaign. This was a testing facility just outside Cambridge, and our contract testing facility, so anyone who has enough money can pay them to test their products for them on animals. So the government really cracked down on this particular campaign. I mean, the campaigners did some incredibly stupid things as well, so this isn't entirely one-sided. But it was a combination of the victories on this side and stupid campaign tactics within this campaign. And there were huge arrests, and basically these sorts of mass protests didn't happen for a decade because it was so restrictive. And, we thought at the time, if we can close down the breeders, it'll make animal experiments so expensive that it'll definitely reduce the numbers of animals being used, because all these animals will have to be imported or either bred on site at the laboratories. So this is a real way to get the numbers down. It didn't. There's more animal experiments being performed in the UK today than in the 1990s. Sow stall ban. Again, it's a good step forward for the UK morally. The message it sends forward saying we don't believe sows should be treated this way. They have moral standing and they don't deserve to be, they have a right not to be treated like this. But without impacting on the demand for the products, 60% of the pork sold here today is imported from countries that still use sow stalls. Live exports are on the increase again, and the hunting ban is very much largely ignored. So what seemed like a lot of victories on the surface haven't actually had that massive impact for animals that some of us may have hoped for. And now luckily, we didn't just carry on doing the same things over and over again. The movement did actually step back and change tactics, largely because I think mass protest was no longer an option. But what rose out of the ashes was something beautiful. We had the vegan outreach movement. So people didn't want to be on the streets, couldn't be on the streets shouting. Instead, they went out on the streets and gave out free vegan food. It's so much more positive. Having done both, I can tell you, I much prefer going out and giving people free food because they're way nicer to you. All of the veg fests started up, after these huge vivisection campaigns. So I worked at Viva when they started that was the incredible Veggie Roadshow. Now it's the Vegan Roadshow, where we did 12 in a year, 1 a month. And it was just so inspiring to go to places like Swansea and talk to people who said, I've been a vegetarian for 2 years and I don't know a single other vegetarian, and everyone I know makes fun of me. And we could be there to say, you're not alone, and show them really good food. And now, you know, these veg fests that take place in 4 cities, the one that happened in London the other weekend had about 15,000 people come through over 2 days. And this has really helped contribute to the growth in veganism, because people come in trying to find out more. They see some of us aren't freaks, some of the food is actually quite nice. They read about the nutritional advantages, or at least that they're as nutritious as living, you know, with animal products. And so this, I think, is a huge move in the right direction for the movement. And you know, obviously the numbers agree with that. So I'm sure you're familiar with this graph from animal charity evaluators. This is US data, but you know, this is the number of animals used and killed in the United States every year. So the massive blue is farmed animals, and then paling into absolute insignificance, we have animals in shelters, animals killed for clothing, and then slightly bigger animals killed in laboratories. But very disproportionately, the amount of money donated to animal charities, farmed animals are just this tiny little square down here. Now that's US data. It's not dissimilar to what happens in the UK. We are a nation of animal lovers. I mean, that is no doubt about it. Most people in the UK would say they love animals, and a lot of animal groups exist here, and a lot of money goes to animal protection organizations. But is it going to the animals that are dying in the largest numbers? No. So this is UK data, just UK. More than 1 billion farmed fish are killed here every year. By default, 100% of those animals are factory farmed. We don't even know how many animals are caught in the sea and killed to be eaten. We kill 875 million chickens, vast majority factory farmed. 39 million laying hens. Now progress has been made here. Only about half of those hens are in cages. The other half are free range. 18 million turkeys, 14 million ducks, both of them virtually all factory farmed. 14 million sheep and lambs. Now they're not inside factory farms. They are in the main the only species in the UK that is still outdoors and extensively reared. 10 million pigs killed here every year, virtually all of them indoors, intensively reared, and 2.7 million cattle. And while cattle reared for beef, again, still tend to be extensively reared outdoors, a lot of dairy production is moving indoors into intensive units. And I live in the West Country, where traditionally you would see cattle outside, dairy cattle, a big dairy producing area, and I go running in the summertime and I see all the cows locked up in the sheds. Glorious sunny summer days, and they're locked up in the sheds because it's more cost effective just to keep them indoors. They don't spend so much energy, expend energy moving around, and more can go into milk production. So we're looking in total at about 2 billion animals farmed in the UK. The vast majority of them are factory farmed. Compared to 20 million birds shot for sport, more or less, 15 million of those are probably game birds that have been bred to be shot. So they will have been intensively reared in cages. 4 million animals used in experiments, 1.5 million caught in snares, mainly on shooting estates to stop them from eating the birds that are being cage bred to be shot for fun. 500,000 mammals killed for sport. So these are deer that are shot, foxes that are hunted. 140,000 cruelty cases investigated by the RSPCA. So that's across the spectrum and will include farmed animal cases as well. About 100,000 homeless dogs here, give or take, at any one time. And about 60,000 pets put to sleep in shelters across the country every year. So roundabout, maximum 27 million animals. So basically almost just a tenth of the number raised and killed on farms. And arguably, you know, a lot of these animals had better lives before they were killed than most of these animals. But where does the money go? So just like in the US, the vast majority of money goes to groups that don't do anything on farmed animals. So I've kind of separated this out into none of these groups do farmed animals at all. The ones in the middle do a bit of farmed animal, amongst lots of other things. And the ones on the right are either exclusively farmed animals, or groups like PETA and Animal Aid do other issues, but they do a large proportion of their work is on farmed animals. So we've got about 400 million on this half and 13 million on this half. Compared to the numbers of animals, it's entirely out of proportion. So when we're talking about farmed animals, it's easy to get lost in the numbers. And I don't think we can focus purely on the numbers. Because not only are farmed animals killed in the greatest numbers, but if they're factory farmed, they are the most miserable animals who have ever lived. From birth until death, they suffer. So I think the best way to analyze the most effective areas to campaign on is a combination of these 4 factors. So obviously numbers, we want to help as many as we can. So then we're talking about factory farm chicken and fish. But then there's also an element of duration. So factory farm chicken is in pain from about the 3rd week of its life, undoubtedly. The last 3 weeks of its life, severe pain. But breeding sows in the UK, who are put into this farrowing crate for 5 weeks every time they give birth, can live for 5 years and be used for breeding. So for 50 weeks of her life, she is in a cage so small, she can't turn around, she can barely stand up, she cannot nuzzle her piglets, she comes out with huge weeping sores on her side from the sides of the crate, or pressure sores from laying on her side. And when she's not in the cage, she's in a barren, shit-covered pen with far too many other breeding sows, and they fight with each other, and she'll have had her tail cut off at a young age, which may have formed a neuroma in the end, which is what happens to human amputees, and they have phantom limb pains their whole life. She'll have had her teeth cut off while she was a piglet. So the duration of her suffering is far longer than that of a factory farm chicken. And then there's the intensity of the suffering. So, by all accounts, hens kept in cages for egg production suffer the highest level of suffering. Because not only has she had the tip of her bill cut off when she was a chick, which again may have formed a neuroma, so she might have constant phantom pains in the end of her bill. She's crowded into a cage where she can't even stretch her wings, which, if that was a wild bird, would be illegal in the UK to put them into a cage where they can't fully extend their wings. She's fighting constantly with her other pen mates who are stuffed in there with her. She's lost her feathers. She's standing on wire mesh her whole life, so her feet hurt. So basically her feet hurts, her face hurts, she can't spread her wings, and she's constantly being pecked at by her pen mates. So by all accounts, they suffer more than any other farmed animal. And unlike meat chickens, they're not dead in 6 weeks. She'll be there for a year to a year and a half. So intensity matters, even though there's only 39 million of these birds compared to 875 million of them. She's suffering an awful lot. And then the